Welcome to Monday, January 12th, 2026. After a catastrophic truck crash, trust Grant Lawson of the law firm for truck safety, board certified, nationally recognized, with millions recovered and relentless advocacy for your justice. Visit truckaccidents.com today. Well, folks, there's a lot of nothing going on in the western half of the nation. So we're just going to yawn through the next 7 days here with very little going on over the western half of the country. Now, for the eastern half of the country, there'll be plenty of weather because that's where everything is going to be directed. This is a massive North American ridge, and I'll show you here in a minute. We showed you this last week, that this is the biggest high-pressure ridge in all of the northern hemisphere, right over the western states. Yes, the Atlantic and the Pacific blocking patterns are gone, but if you were to ask me what would be the worst thing that could happen after the blocks go away, it would be a giant ridge of high pressure along the west coast, and that's exactly what has happened. So it's not necessarily a blocking pattern, it's just luck of the draw, how things have panned out and just kind of how it's gone this winter season. So all the cold, all the snow, all the winter weather will be in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, the northeastern United States. They've got a lot of winter weather coming over the next 7 days with a couple of storm systems moving through. If you're traveling into that part of the country, there'll be plenty of travel delays and plenty of winter weather, while the western United States will just be under a very strong high pressure pattern. Now, we will be under northwest flow, which will occasionally send some cooler air down the front range and into the plains, but it'll have very little moisture with it. Now, what we're going to talk about here at the end of the podcast is the position and the angle of these high pressure ridges out in the Pacific are absolute key to where the weather goes. Where does the cold wintry weather go in relation to where these high pressure ridges are in the Pacific? Because the placement in terms of longitude and latitude, and also the angle, the shape of them, ends up directing the weather. And this will really come into play here, and you can really see it here when we get to the meat of the podcast here in a moment. Yes, folks got snow. For those of you that got snow here over the last week, you won the lottery. Shot there from Walden and Sheridan, Casper, enough to cover up the irises that are wanting to poke up. And then Divide, Colorado, 10 to 12 inches of snow there. Colorado Springs got a big dump. In fact, it was heavy, wet, spring-like snow enough to break the snow shovel. Now, so for some of you might say, well, what is that? What is that white stuff? Well, it did happen in a few selected areas, finally. But there's a large part of real estate that has more snow than other areas where there's just a lot of brown, and that includes down from Bridgeport, Texas, up to Belfouche, South Dakota, where there should be plenty of snow on the ground, at least in the hills, and there isn't. And Lyons, Nebraska, up along the Pine Ridge area, kind of the same thing. And no snow on the ground. That looks like a shot from hunting season in October in Springer Reservoir. Beautiful sunrises and sunsets are back now that we're returning to a high pressure pattern across the Intermountain West and the Western High Plains. And still, a lot of open water where there should be solid ice and ice fishing events going on. Can't do that when there's open water. So as we take a look and see what happens going forward, you can see that the beginnings of the high pressure ridge is beginning to form here along the west coast. We do have a pretty good pipeline of moisture coming off the Pacific, but as the high pressure ridge grows and expands and bulges northward, well, that's where that weather is going to go, and it's going to go up, over, and down into the Midwest. And you can really see that here. With today's 500 millibar chart, we've got the jet stream up north, going across the U.S.-Canadian border. The high pressure ridge is building, and it's going to buckle and amplify as we go through the days ahead. So this is where we're going to start the week. Now, by Wednesday morning, you can see it amplifying. So there is going to be winds aloft from the north-northwest. So the really warm air out of the desert states is going to be bottled up there along the west coast into the desert southwest. So as you get east of the Rockies, the air will be moderate here. And look at where the cold is going. Well, the cold is going where it's wanted to go all winter, into the nation's midsection, the Great Lake, and even drive pretty cold air all the way to the Gulf Coast. So temperatures out here will be warmer than the Gulf Coast as we get to midweek. There will be a little bit of moisture, a little bit of snow shower activity on the backside of this system as the cold air rushes through. Here's that wave we showed you last week that's going to go up, over, and down and amplify the ridge some more. So this is Wednesday. And between now and Wednesday, here's your precipitation. You can see a whole lot of nothing right here. Zip, zero, nothing. The jet stream comes up, comes over, comes down. So this is where we may have a little bit of shower activity on the northwest flow side of the building ridge as the colder air heads into the Midwest, but nothing to write home about. Then as we get into Friday, this is where the ridge really amplifies. So the high builds and gets very strong just west of Seattle. So you're going to have very warm, generally speaking, dry conditions right here, right underneath the ridge axis. The strongest part of the high pressure is just to the right of the ridge axis. This is where the sinking motions are the strongest. This is where the weather is going to be the most fair. Winds aloft come in. There will be a shot of colder air banked up against the front range, then out into the plains, and we've got a double-barreled storm system. So mid to late week and into the weekend, these systems are going to cycle through. While some cooler air gets pushed up east of the divide, the western slopes to the Pacific, everything is shut off. This is just turning off any flow of moisture. The jet stream is not coming in like this. It's getting directed up, over, and then it's getting directed down. So that's where all the weather is going to be. And if we take a look at the whole northern hemisphere, I told you that this is the biggest high pressure ridge in all of the northern hemisphere. Look at that. We've got a pretty good one out here in the Atlantic, but the magnitude and the intensity of this high, pretty darn strong. So it's got to go through its life cycle. That's plain and simple. It has to go through its life cycle, which is going to be about a week to 10 days before it breaks down and shifts. It's not necessarily a block. It's acting as a block for a week or so, but it's not going to maintain itself. It's going to break down, hopefully, it should, as we'll take a look at that here in a moment. So what this means is, through the work week and into the weekend, other than glancing blows of colder air along and east of the Continental Divide, there's very little weather happening. So by Sunday, we do see the high pressure getting squeezed a bit. It's not nearly as strong on a west to east standpoint. It's getting attacked here by this upper level low. But you can see the funneling of the cold air into the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the East Coast. And again, cool air all the way down into the Gulf Coast. So the western United States is continuing to be protected right into the weekend from this high pressure ridge. What happens after that? Well, when we take a look at that, we'll show you this ridge axis situation. So between now and Saturday, you can see where the wintry weather is going to be. All the way through here. The upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, that's going to be the area that's going to be most impacted. We kind of have to watch along the eastern seaboard here. There may be more winter weather getting into places like Boston and New York. We'll have to see. But you can see the western United States, there is zip zero going on. So let's take a look at this ridge axis situation. When I take this black line, I'm drawing the line through the axis of the wave. The tilt and where these high pressure systems sit when they develop along the east coast, the west coast rather, and the eastern side of the Pacific is where things are going to direct it. Notice the tilt of the axis is pointed a little bit more to the northwest. It's not much, but it's tilted from the northwest to the southeast a little bit, just a little bit of a tilt. But that directs the colder air more east. If the tilt was different and more towards here, like this, then the colder air would have a chance to come further west. Also, the high pressure ridge placement is critical. When you get a big ridge like this on the west coast, you're going to get a big trough on the east coast. So when you get a big storm and a big cold wave that's going into the Great Lakes in the northeast, the western United States is just going to be fair. That's just the way the pattern works. So what we have to do is we've got to get this ridge to go further out into the Pacific, and we got to change the ridge axis angle, because when it's tilted like this, the cold air goes that way. When it's tilted like this, the cold air comes more this way. So we have to watch where these high pressure ridges form in the eastern Pacific, whether or not they're on the west coast or more out over the water. That's where the ridge axis needs to be. If the Rockies, the west coast, and the desert southwest and the plains are to get into winter ever, that's where it's got to be. So we've broken the block, but the high pressure ridge has wanted to form along the west coast. So let's take a look at what happens in the long term. If it happens, the modeling is suggesting by the latter parts of next week, so we're talking about all the way into the 21st through the 24th of January, we have that ridge axis now where we want it. Once it's there, and notice that the ridge angle, the ridge axis has changed, and then angles changes, notice where the low pressure goes to. It doesn't go to the east coast and the Great Lakes, it gets directed into the west coast. So if the high is here, we're out of luck. If the high is here, we have winter, and we have precipitation, and we have colder weather. If you look at the distance between these ridge axes, I mean, there's quite a few hundred miles here, but it's that close. It's that close from a lot of high pressure and a lot of fair dry weather to a lot of cold and stormy weather. So we're extremely sensitive in the western United States to where the high pressure ridge axis goes. So right there, it's bad. There, it's good if you want winter weather. So what we're seeing here is something that we're getting some good agreement here between the GFS model and the European model. They're similar. They're not exactly the same, but you see they're saying the same thing. Will this happen? Don't know. We just got to wait and see. But that ridge axis has got to be in that location, and it's got to be at that angle for the western United States to get into winter weather. Late last week, we showed you the European weeklies, and the European weekly is showing exactly that. It's showing the ridge axis here where it needs to be, which means the low pressure here. So, and then look what happens in the east. What happens in the east is the opposite. Their weather flips. They go to high pressure. And it's all because of where the ridge axis wants to be. We'll have more for you tomorrow. Have yourself a good Monday.